We are doing a deep dive into Chapter 14 of our source text. Overview of metabolism and the provision of metabolic fuels.
And this is foundational stuff. I want to be clear right off the bat. We aren't just talking about metabolism in the pop culture sense.
Right.
You know, like, oh, I have a slow metabolism, so I gain weight if I even look at a donut.
The magazine cover version of metabolism.
Exactly that. We are going way, way deeper. We are going line by line through the biochemistry of how life actually sustains itself. We're talking about the flow of energy, the breakdown of matter.
And the really intricate signaling systems that keep us from, well, just dissolving into a puddle of entropy.
That's a good way to put it.
We have a serious stack of notes here, including some incredibly detailed diagrams, specifically figures 14:1 through 14:10 in the text, that we are going to visually walk through. The mission today is to explain exactly how your body processes carbs, fats, and proteins, how it decides which one to use, and what happens when those signals get crossed.
It's a story of logistics, really. It all comes down to supply and demand.
So let's start with the big word on the cover, metabolism. If we strip away all the diet culture baggage, what are we actually talking about?
Well, the text gives us a very rigorous definition. It describes metabolism as the interconversion of chemical compounds in the body.
Okay, interconversion.
The pathways taken by individual molecules, their interrelationships, and the mechanisms that regulate the flow of metabolites.
The flow of metabolites. That sounds so incredibly sterile for what is, I mean, essentially the difference between being alive and being a statue.
It does sound dry, doesn't it? But think about the reality of it. You eat a piece of bread. That bread is starch. Your body doesn't need starch. It needs energy for your heart to beat, and it needs glycogen to store in your liver, and maybe it needs to build a cell membrane.
Right.
Metabolism is the alchemy that turns that bread into you. It's the traffic control system for every molecule in your body.
And looking here at page 129, the text breaks this traffic down into three very distinct categories of pathways.
Right.
I feel like if we don't get these three definitions down, the rest of this whole deep dive just won't make sense.
Agreed. These are the three pillars. So the first category is anabolic pathways.
Anabolic. Okay, I hear that word, and I immediately think of bodybuilders and anabolic steroids.
Yeah.
You know, big muscles.
And that association is actually really helpful here. Anabolic comes from the Greek for throwing up or building up.
Building up.
These pathways are your construction crews. They are involved in the synthesis of larger, more complex compounds from smaller precursors.
So like taking a bunch of Lego bricks and building a castle.
Exactly. Or, for example, taking simple amino acids and welding them together to build a muscle protein, or taking glucose molecules and stringing them together to build a glycogen reserve. But here's the key physics constraint. Anabolic pathways are endothermic.
Endothermic. That means heat absorbing, or
In a biological context, it means they require an input of energy. You don't get a skyscraper for free. You have to pay the construction workers. In the cell, you pay with ATP. You have to spend energy to build structure.
okay, so anabolic is construction, and it's expensive. Got it. What's the opposite?
The opposite is catabolic pathways. If anabolic is construction, catabolic is the demolition crew. Okay.
These pathways break down large molecules into smaller ones.
And I'm guessing if building costs money, demolition releases it.
Precisely. These reactions are usually oxidative, and they are exothermic. They release energy. They produce reducing equivalents, and mainly via the respiratory chain, they produce ATP.
Yeah.
This is how we pay the bills.
So we break down food
That's catabolism.
to generate the cash, the ATP.
To then build our bodies, which is anabolism.
It's a constant cycle of breaking and building. But the text mentions a third category, which I hadn't really heard of before, amphibolic pathways.
Yes.
Yes.
Amphibolic. The root word there is amphid, meaning both, like an amphibian lives on both land and water.
Right.
These pathways are the crossroads of metabolism.
The town square.
The town square, the central roundabout. They act as links between the anabolic and the catabolic pathways. And the classic example, and the one we will talk about a lot today, is the citric acid cycle, also known as the Krebs cycle.
Oh, boy. That brings back high school biology nightmares for some people, I'm sure. It shouldn't. It's actually beautiful. Just think of the citric acid cycle as a roundabout. Traffic enters from catabolic breakdowns, that's fuel coming in, and traffic can exit to go build things, which is anabolic synthesis. It connects everything.
Okay, so we have the pathways. Now let's talk about the fuel itself. The text puts some pretty hard numbers on what it takes to run a human being.
Right. A 70-kilogram adult, that's roughly 154 pounds, needs about 8 to 12 megajoules of metabolic fuel every single day.
And translating that from science speak, that's about 1,920 to 2,900 calories per day.
Correct. And where does that come from? Well, the text outlines the typical fuel mix for humans. Carbohydrates provide about 40 to 60%.
Yeah.
Lipids fat provide 30 to 40%, and protein provides about 10 to 15%.
I want to pause on that protein number for a second. 10 to 15%. In the fitness world, everyone is obsessed with protein. But biologically, it seems like we don't actually like burning it for fuel.
That is a crucial insight. We don't. Protein is functional. It's structural. It's your muscles, your enzymes, your antibodies. Burning protein for energy is it's like chopping up your dining room table to put in the fireplace.
You can do it.
You can absolutely do it, and it burns, but that's not what the table is for. You'd much rather burn the firewood you have stacked outside, and that's carbs and fat.
That makes perfect sense. So we prefer the firewood. But this leads us to the fundamental problem that's introduced on page 130, the cycle of feast and famine.
This is the evolutionary mismatch we all live with. The text notes that humans eat efficiently. We tend to consume our daily intake in just 2 or 3 discrete meals.
Right.
But, and this is the key, our cells have a constant requirement for metabolic fuels throughout the day.
So the factory never closes, but the delivery trucks only show up at 8:00 a.m., 12:00 p.m., and maybe 7:00 p.m.
Exactly. So what do we need? We need storage reserves. We need a warehouse. And the text highlights 3 main types of reserves. First, glycogen. This is stored carbohydrate, mostly found in the liver and muscles.
That's the pantry. Easy access, quick energy.
Perfect analogy. Second, triacylglycerol. This is lipid, stored in adipose tissue, your body fat.
That's the deep storage warehouse. Lots of energy, packed in really tight. And the third.
Well, this is the kicker, and I want to really emphasize this because it's probably the most dangerous design flaw or feature in the human system. The text mentions labile protein, but it clarifies something vital. It says that if intake is consistently lower than expenditure, we have to rely on reserves. But, and listen to this, there is no specific storage reserve for amino acids, like there is for fat or sugar.
Wait, hold on. Let's make sure everyone gets this. We have fat stores, we have glycogen stores, but we do not have a protein tank.
We do not have a protein tank.
So if I stop eating and my body needs amino acids to, make an enzyme to keep my heart beating, where does it get them?
It has to strip them from the structure of the house itself.
It eats the furniture.
It eats the furniture, and then when that's gone, it starts on the walls, and then it goes for the copper wiring. When we talk about burning protein in starvation, you are not dipping into a savings account. You are disassembling your functional machinery, your muscles, your immune system, your organ tissues, catabolizing them to get the amino acids you need to keep the lights on.
That is genuinely terrifying. It explains why starvation isn't just running out of gas, it's the engine eating its own pistons.
That is exactly what it is, and the text notes the consequences. Emaciation, wasting, and eventually death. It's a ruthless balance sheet. If intake is less than expenditure, the body will consume itself to survive. And conversely, if intake is greater than expenditure, you get obesity, which carries its own set of health hazards.
Okay, with that sobering thought in mind, let's visualize how this system actually works. I want to look at figure 14:1. The caption describes it as an outline of the pathways for the catabolism of dietary carbohydrate, protein, and fat.
Right. And since you can't see it, I want you to picture a giant funnel. At the top wide part of the funnel, you have 3 boxes: carbohydrate, protein, and fat.
Okay, the 3 big inputs are food.
Arrows point down from them through a process labeled digestion and absorption. The body breaks these complex foods into their simple units. So carbohydrates become simple sugars, mainly glucose.
All right.
Protein becomes amino acids, and fat becomes fatty acids and glycerol.
So that's the raw material entering the system.
Correct. Now follow the arrows further down the funnel. All 3 of these paths, they converge. They all funnel into a central hexagon labeled acetyl-CoA.
Acetyl-CoA. If there's one molecule to remember from this entire deep dive, it's this one, isn't it?
Absolutely. The text makes it clear that acetyl-CoA is the common currency. It doesn't matter if you eat a steak, which is protein and fat, or a potato, which is carb. A huge portion of that energy ends up as acetyl-CoA. It really unifies our entire understanding of nutrition.
And what happens to acetyl-CoA? Where does it go from there?
In the diagram, it drops right into that roundabout we talked about, the citric acid cycle. The cycle spins, and out comes 2H. That stands for reducing equivalents, which then lead to ATP generation via oxidative phosphorylation. And the final waste product is CO2.
So conceptually, we eat food, It all funnels down to acetyl-CoA. It goes through the cycle. We get energy, and we breathe out carbon dioxide as the exhaust.
That is the perfect high-level view, but the text gets much, much more granular. Let's zoom in a bit. Let's look at figure 14-2. This one focuses specifically on carbohydrate metabolism.
Okay, zooming in on carbs, I see glucose at the very top.
And that glucose is metabolized down to a molecule called pyruvate through a pathway called glycolysis. This all happens in the cytosol, the main fluid part of the cell.
And from pyruvate, I see there's a fork in the road.
The famous aerobic versus anaerobic fork. If there is oxygen available, aerobic conditions, pyruvate enters the mitochondrion and becomes acetyl-CoA, joining that main citric acid cycle we just saw. That's the efficient path. That's where you get the most energy.
And if there's no oxygen, like if I'm sprinting and my muscles are screaming and I just can't breathe fast enough.
That's anaerobic. The pyruvate gets converted to lactate. This lets the cycle keep running for a short time without oxygen, but it creates that lactic acid buildup we all associate with muscle fatigue and that burning sensation.
Now, there's a side loop here in figure 14-2 that I think is really easy to miss, but the text makes a point of highlighting it. The pentose phosphate pathway. What on earth is that doing?
It's this little branch off from glucose. It's an alternative loop, and it's absolutely critical for two reasons. One, it produces something called NADPH, which is a type of reducing equivalent needed for making fatty acids.
Okay.
But two, and this is vital, it produces ribose.
Ribose, as in ribonucleic acid, DNA and RNA.
Exactly. You literally cannot make nucleotides or nucleic acids, your genetic material, your blueprint for life without ribose. So this little side street off the main glucose highway is actually maintaining the very blueprint of life itself.
That's wild. And I also see an arrow pointing up in this diagram, gluconeogenesis.
Yes. This is the reverse process. The body can take lactate or some amino acids and push them back up the chain to create new glucose. We'll talk about why it does that when we get to the fasting state, but just know for now, the body can make its own sugar if it has to. It's not a one-way street.
Okay, let's flip the page to figure 14-3. This is the map for fatty acid metabolism.
This one is more circular. You have dietary fat coming in. It can be esterified into triacylglycerol. That's storage. That's the fat sitting on your body.
Right.
Or it undergoes beta oxidation.
Beta oxidation. That sounds intense. Is that the burning of fat for energy?
It is. Think of a fatty acid as a long chain of carbon atoms, like a string of beads. Beta oxidation is like a pair of molecular scissors that chops two carbon chunks off the end of the chain over and over again. And guess what those two carbon chunks are?
Don't tell me. Acetyl-CoA.
Acetyl-CoA. It all comes back to the hub. But what's interesting is figure 14-3 shows three distinct fates for acetyl-CoA that come specifically from fat.
What are they?
One, it goes into the citric acid cycle to be oxidized to CO2 and water. That's pure energy. Two, it is used as a precursor for cholesterol and other steroids.
So my body actually makes its own cholesterol from the fat I eat.
A lot of it, yes. And the third fate is very, very important for later in our talk. It can form ketone bodies.
Ketones. Okay, we hear about keto diets all the time.
In this biochemical context, the liver produces these ketone bodies, things like acetone, acetoacetate, and 3-hydroxybutyrate, when there's a really high rate of fatty acid oxidation. The liver makes them and then exports them to other tissues to use as fuel.
Okay, keep a pin in that. Ketones are important. Got it.
Right.
Now, moving to figure 14-4, amino acid metabolism. This looks a lot more complicated.
It is more complex, and that's because unlike glucose, which is one thing, there are 20 different amino acids, but the general pattern involves two main steps. First, transamination. That's basically moving the amino group, the nitrogen part, around to make different amino acids.
Okay.
Second, deamination. This is removing the nitrogen entirely.
And nitrogen is a problem, right? We can't just have ammonia floating around in our system.
Right, ammonia is highly toxic, especially to the brain. So the body has a system to convert that nitrogen safely into urea, which is then excreted by the kidneys in your urine. That leaves behind what's called the carbon skeleton of the amino acid.
And looking at the diagram, that skeleton is basically just another fuel source. It can be burned or it can be turned into glucose.
Correct. The text also makes a crucial distinction here between essential and non-essential amino acids. The essential ones are the ones we must get from our diet. Our body cannot build them from scratch. The non-essential ones we can synthesize by modifying other molecules.
So we've looked at the chemicals. Now let's zoom out again and look at the geography. Where is all of this happening in the body? Figure 14-5 shows the organ level, and this really brings up the role of the liver.
The liver is grand central station of metabolism. It's the clearinghouse. Notice the hepatic portal vein in the diagram.
Yeah, it connects the small intestine directly to the liver.
Exactly. So when you digest carbs and protein, the water-soluble products, so glucose and amino acids, they don't just go into your general blood supply to float around. They go straight to the liver first.
So the liver gets first dibs.
First dibs and first responsibility. The liver acts as a buffer. It's a gatekeeper. It regulates the concentration of these nutrients in your blood. It decides, okay, blood sugar is high. I'm going to pull some out and make glycogen. That's glycogenesis.
Okay.
Or it might say, wow, we have way too much, let's turn some into fat. That's lipogenesis. The liver ensures that the blood that finally reaches your brain and your muscles has a nice, steady level of nutrients, not these wild, damaging spikes.
But wait a minute, look at figure 14-6. This one is titled Transport and Metabolism of Lipid. This looks totally different from the glucose map we just looked at.
It is completely different. And this is a really cool evolutionary quirk. Remember how we just said the liver is the gatekeeper for carbs and protein? Well, fat is hydrophobic. It hates water. You can't just dump bacon grease into your bloodstream. It would clog everything up in an instant. So the intestine packages dietary fats into these massive spheres called chylomicrons.
Massive spheres.
Relatively speaking, yeah. They're these big balls of fat and protein, and they are too huge to squeeze into the tiny capillaries that lead to the liver. They don't fit in the door of the hepatic portal vein.
So they're stuck. How do they get out?
The body has a back door, a different transport system, the lymphatic system.
The lymph system. I thought that was for the immune system, for white blood cells and stuff.
It is, but it also moonlights as the heavy haul transport network for fats. These chylomicrons get absorbed into the lymph, they travel up your chest in something called the thoracic duct, and they get dumped directly into the bloodstream right near your heart, specifically in the left subclavian vein.
Wait. Are you saying dietary fat completely skips the liver on its first pass?
Yes. It skips customs. It enters systemic circulation directly. This means your heart, your muscles, and your adipose tissue all get first crack at that dietary fat before the liver even sees it.
That feels like a massive security breach in the system.
Or a priority lane. Your heart loves burning fat for fuel. So by bypassing the liver, the body delivers this incredibly energy-dense fuel straight to the critical organs that need it most.
That is wild.
And figure 14-6 shows an enzyme called lipoprotein lipase, or LPL. You can think of LPL as a pair of scissors on the capillary walls of your muscle and fat tissue. As the chylomicrons float by, LPL snips off fatty acids so the tissues can absorb them. The remnants, the empty shells of the chylomicrons, then go to the liver to be cleared and recycled.
That is a huge detail that I think most people completely miss. Fat just plays by a totally different set of rules.
Completely different rules.
Okay, let's shrink down again. We've gone from the chemicals to the organs. Now let's look inside the cell itself, figure 14-7. The subcellular map, it looks like a little city map.
It really is a map of the cell's different compartments or organelles. You have the mitochondrion, the cytosol, and the endoplasmic reticulum. And different jobs happen in different rooms of the factory.
Can you walk us through the rooms?
Sure. The mitochondrion is the power plant. This is where the citric acid cycle, the beta-oxidation of fatty acids, and ketogenesis happen. It's where all the heavy-duty, oxygen-dependent energy production occurs.
And the cytosol.
That's the main factory floor surrounding the power plant. That's where glycolysis, the pentose phosphate pathway, and even fatty acid synthesis happen.
And the endoplasmic reticulum, or ER.
That's the assembly line. The membranes of the ER contain the enzymes for triacylglycerol synthesis for building fat. And the ribosomes on the rough ER are the machines responsible for protein synthesis.
The arrows in figure 14-7 show things moving across membranes. Pyruvate moves in, citrate moves out. It implies that moving these molecules isn't just easy.
It's not. It's a major logistical challenge. You need specific transporters, specific shuttles. Regulating who gets in and out of the power plant, the mitochondrion, is a major way the cell controls its overall speed.
Which brings us perfectly to section 7. Regulation. Who is driving the bus? Page 135. The text here distinguishes between equilibrium and non-equilibrium reactions.
Think of equilibrium reactions as like an open door with traffic flowing freely both ways. There's no real control there. It just balances out naturally. Non-equilibrium reactions are the checkpoints. They are essentially irreversible. They only go one way, and they're catalyzed by specific regulatory enzymes. This is where the body chooses to exert control.
And figure 14-8 breaks down how that control works. It lists 3 main mechanisms.
The first is allosteric regulation. This is immediate. It's chemical feedback. Imagine an assembly line. If the final product, let's call it product D, starts to pile up at the end, it can actually physically go back and jam the first machine, enzyme 1, to stop it from making more. That's feedback inhibition. Conversely, if you have a huge pile of raw material, product A, it might help the next machine work faster. That's feed forward.
Okay, so that's the machine basically regulating itself on the fly. What about the management?
That's hormonal control. Hormones like insulin or glucagon are the managers. They bind to the outside of the cell. They don't usually enter, but they trigger secondary messengers inside the cell, things like KMP or calcium ions that carry the message.
So the boss calls down from the main office and says, speed up the line or slow it down.
Exactly. And the third mechanism is gene expression. This is the slowest, but also the most profound. This is the C-suite deciding to actually build more machines, more enzymes, or to scrap some existing ones. This is induction or repression. It takes hours or even days to take effect.
Okay, let's put this regulation into action. The text details the difference between the fed state and the fasting state. This is the daily rhythm of life for most of us.
This is page 136. It starts with something it calls the glucose imperative. The text makes a critical point here that I think is often overlooked. Red blood cells lack mitochondria.
No power plants.
No power plants at all. This means they are wholly reliant on anaerobic glycolysis. They need glucose. They have no other fuel option.
And brain.
The brain is also a huge glucose user. It can adapt to use ketones, but it takes time. But because these two tissues must have glucose, the body's entire strategy during fasting is to spare every last molecule of glucose for them. They are the VIPs.
So let's look at the fed state. You just ate a big meal, a sandwich, and some chips.
Insulin is king here. It's secreted by the beta cells of the pancreas, and the mechanism is just fascinating. Insulin causes these little transporters called GLUT4, you can think of them as delivery doors, to move from inside the cell up to the surface membrane of muscle and fat cells.
So normally those doors are locked away inside.
They're hiding inside the cell in little vesicles. Insulin is the signal that brings them to the surface. And suddenly, glucose can rush into the muscle and fat tissue. The liver is a bit different. It takes up glucose without insulin's help. But insulin is the signal that tells the liver to turn that glucose into glycogen for storage.
So the system-wide message is, store, store, store. We have plenty of fuel.
Yes. Figure 14-9 shows this flow really well. In the fed state, glucose becomes glycogen or it becomes fat. It's a time of plenty.
Now fast forward 6 hours, or 12. You haven't eaten since lunch. You're in the fasting state.
Insulin levels drop. Glucagon levels rise. The whole signal flips. Adipose tissue gets the signal to start releasing free fatty acids into the blood, and your muscle and heart tissue switch their fuel source. They stop burning glucose and start burning those fatty acids instead.
Why do they switch?
To save the glucose for the brain and the red blood cells, it's rationing. They are the designated drivers for glucose. Meanwhile, the liver kicks into high gear with gluconeogenesis. It starts taking amino acids from protein breakdown and lactate from the red blood cells, and it makes new glucose to pump into the blood to keep the brain happy.
It's heroic, really. The liver and muscles essentially sacrifice their access to glucose so the brain can survive.
It is an incredible act of internal cooperation. Now, let's look at what happens when this goes on for too long, when we move from fasting into full-blown starvation.
Okay, we have table 14-1 here with some energy math.
Right, it just compares the fuels. Fat provides 37 kilojoules per gram. It's the densest fuel we have. Carbs and protein are only about 17 kilojoules per gram, less than half.
So fat is king for storage.
By far. The table also mentions something called the respiratory quotient, or RQ.
What exactly is that?
It's the ratio of carbon dioxide you produce to the oxygen you consume. And it tells you what fuel you're burning. If you are burning pure carbohydrates, your RQ is exactly 1.0. If you are burning pure fat, your RQ drops to about 0.71.
So you could actually measure a person's breath and tell if their body has switched into starvation mode.
You can. It's a key tool in metabolic research. If their RQ is dropping toward 0.7, you know they've made the switch to primarily burning fat.
That's incredible. But I want to spend some real time on figure 1410. This is the timeline of starvation. This graph is just fascinating because it's basically a countdown clock of death, but it also shows how hard the body fights to stop that clock.
It is a survival strategy played out over days and weeks. Look at the x-axis. We are looking at days of starvation, not hours.
Okay, so day 1. skip breakfast, lunch, and dinner.
Look at the glucose line. It dips, right?
Yes.
But notice it doesn't crash to zero. It stabilizes at a new, lower level.
Which is weird because we just said my liver glycogen, my sugar reserves, are basically gone in about 18 hours. So where is that glucose coming from on day 3?
That is gluconeogenesis. That's your liver frantically turning amino acids, which, remember, it's getting from your muscles and lactate into brand new sugar. It has to. The brain demands it.
But looking at the graph, there is this crucial crossover point. It happens around day 2 or day 3. Look at this line for ketone bodies.
This is the miracle switch. Normally, your brain is a complete glucose snob. It refuses to eat anything else. But after about 48, 72 hours of low glucose, the liver is pumping out so many ketones from burning all that fat that the concentration in the blood just skyrockets.
The line on the graph goes almost vertical here.
And the brain, realizing there is literally no other option, starts to open its doors to ketones. It undergoes a process called keto adaptation.
Why is that such a game changer?
Because of the math. If the brain can get, say, 2/3 of its energy from ketones, it only needs 1/3 as much glucose. And if it needs less glucose, the liver doesn't have to break down as much muscle protein to make that glucose.
So the ketones are.
Yeah.
They're like muscle armor.
That is the perfect way to describe it. Ketosis is a protein-sparing mechanism. If we didn't have this ability to switch to ketones, we would burn through our diaphragm and heart muscle and die in a matter of weeks. With ketones, a healthy person can survive for months on their fat stores.
That is simply amazing. But the text mentions some clinical aspects here that are really important, specifically a condition called cachexia.
This is different from simple starvation. Starvation is just an absence of food. Cachexia is a wasting syndrome associated with diseases like cancer or AIDS. And the text says it is driven by inflammatory signals called cytokines.
How does it differ from just not eating?
In simple starvation, the body does everything it can to save protein. We just saw that with the ketone switch. In cachexia, these cytokines drive the catabolism, the breakdown of protein, even when there is plenty of food available. The patient can be eating, but the body is still actively breaking down its own muscle. It's a signaling error of the highest order.
So the body thinks it needs to tear down the walls even though the pantry is full.
Exactly. It's a devastating process.
And then there is ketosis in a disease context. We just talked about starvation ketosis, which is life-saving. But what about diabetic ketoacidosis?
That is pathological ketosis. It's what happens in untreated type 1 diabetes. In type 1, there's no insulin. So even if blood sugar is sky high after a meal, the glucose can't get into the cells.
So the cells think they're starving?
The cells are screaming starvation.
Yeah.
The body responds by taking the brakes off fat breakdown completely. It dumps massive amounts of fatty acids into the blood. The liver goes into overdrive, turning them into ketones. But unlike in starvation, where it's a controlled process, here it is a runaway train. You get so many ketones, which are acidic, that the pH of the blood starts to drop.
Acidosis.
Severe acidosis. It leads to coma and, if untreated, death. It's a metabolic catastrophe. The text notes this happens because the lack of insulin fails to antagonize the actions of glucagon. It's an unopposed signal to burn everything.
And it mentions this can happen in animals too. Twin pregnancy in sheep or heavy lactation in cattle.
Yes, any situation where the glucose demand is so astronomically high that the system can't keep up and tips over into this runaway ketosis.
It's just such a delicate balance. High demand, low supply, or just a few cross signals, and the whole engine starts to smoke.
It's a system that works brilliantly 99.9% of the time, but when it fails spectacularly.
So let's try to bring all this together. We've looked at the factory floor, the management, the shipping routes, and all the emergency protocols. What is the single biggest takeaway for you digging this deep into Chapter 14?
For me, it has to be the centrality of acetyl-CoA. It really is the hub. Whether you eat butter, bread, or beef, it all funnels down to that one single molecule to enter the citric acid cycle. It unifies our entire understanding of nutrition. It's elegant.
For me, it's the resilience of the system that we saw in that starvation graph. The way the different organs cooperate, the muscle refusing glucose so the brain can have it, the liver churning out ketones to save the muscles. It's a level of, biological altruism that happens inside our own bodies without us ever thinking about it.
That's a beautiful way to put it. The so what here, for you listening, is that understanding these pathways explains everything. It explains why weight loss is hard. The body defends its reserves with everything it has, and it explains how diseases like diabetes wreak havoc by breaking the communication lines.
It's not just about fuel, it's about information, the signals.
Precisely. The signals are everything.
And I want to leave you with a thought based on that cachexia point. The text describes how the body literally eats itself despite having food, all because of bad signals from cytokines. It raises a fascinating question. Metabolism isn't just about what you eat, it's about what your body thinks is happening. If the signals, the hormones, the cytokines, the stress signals are wrong, the fuel doesn't matter. So what other metabolic miscommunications are we suffering from in our modern, high-stress, chronic disease world? Are we signaling famine or infection to ourselves when we are just sitting in traffic?
That is a profound question to ponder. We might be constantly telling our factory to prepare for a war that isn't actually happening.
Something to chew on. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive into the engine within.
It was a pleasure.
Keep those engines running and stay curious.